So here's the situation. A political standoff is costing the U.S. economy billions in permanent, unrecoverable losses. And it's threatening food aid for something like 40 million Americans. But the actual demand, the thing driving this whole crisis, it carries a future price tag getting close to $500 billion. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going through the CBO reports, commentary on the spending demands, updates on what's actually happening with federal operations. We're going to distill exactly what this 2025 government shutdown is costing right now and, well, down the line.
Yeah, and we really have to start with just how serious this is.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just like paperwork getting delayed. As of today, October 29th, the immediate fallout is pretty severe. We're seeing essential workers, people we rely on, going unpaid. Think about air traffic controllers. These are the people keeping our skies safe, right? They just got their first $0 paycheck. But honestly, the really unprecedented crisis, the one with huge human cost, is set for November 1st. That's when the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that's $8 billion in food aid, it's scheduled to just halt for 40 million Americans. And if you connect that immediate pain back to the bigger picture, the cause is, well, it's a high-stakes political game. It's about leverage.
A leverage play that seems centered on one very specific and, frankly, very expensive demand.
Exactly right. The dominant political faction, the Democrats in this case, they're using the shutdown, they're leveraging it to demand the permanent extension of those Enhanced Affordable Care Act premium tax credits. This isn't, just a small ask as part of funding the government. It's a massive structural policy change being demanded under duress. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, they estimate making these subsidies permanent. It would increase federal spending by almost $500 billion. That's $415 billion in direct costs over 10 years.
Okay, so that's our mission today. We need to dive past the headlines, the immediate chaos. We're going to measure the real, tangible loss from the shutdown itself, and then compare that directly to the, well, staggering fiscal cost of the policy being demanded just to reopen the government.
Right. Let's start with that immediate strain, the operational side. It's hitting essential workers first and hardest.
Yeah, absolutely. We look at these CBO models, these big economic numbers, but you have to remember the government machine is run by actual people. And right now, they're facing intense financial pressure. The government has, about 650,000 employees furloughed, just sent home, no work, no pay. And then another 600,000 or so are called accepted or essential. They have to work, but they're not getting paid either.
And that requirement, forcing people to work without pay, it isn't just financially tough, although it certainly is that. It's also becoming a security and safety issue. You mentioned air traffic controllers.
Yeah.
They are under immense stress anyway, managing complex airspace. The National Air Traffic Controllers Association put out a statement saying getting that $0 paycheck, it's an additional stressor, and that directly creates a, quote, safety problem in the skies.
That makes sense. So given those risks, those potential safety issues, why hasn't the administration found a way? Why haven't they deemed ATC pay, like a legally mandatory exception, shutdown or no shutdown? Why are we forcing these critical safety workers to operate under this kind of duress?
Well, it really comes down to the very narrow legal definitions of what counts as essential personnel who must be paid right now versus those who will eventually get back pay. And in this kind of shutdown environment, the legal interpretation seems to favor delaying the payment, unfortunately. And we know from past shutdowns, this kind of stress impacts performance. Remember previously, absenteeism among TSA officers, it peaked at 10%. That's triple the normal rate. And the risk is there for air traffic controllers, too. Okay, so beyond the federal workforce itself, what about the immediate hit to the wider economy? Well, if you look at just the disruption to commerce, to travel, to everyday life, the numbers really start to add up fast. The U.S. Travel Association, they estimate that the combined losses from travel impacts, think flight cancellations, fewer bookings, plus attraction closures, national parks being closed is a big one, and also reduced government travel itself. All that totals about $140 million every single day.
Wow, $140 million a day. That's huge. And if you, the listener, maybe you had a trip planned to a national park or you needed a business license process, that $140 million daily loss, it becomes really tangible pretty quickly. It translates directly into, personal hassle and canceled business.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's get to the permanent damage, the stuff we don't get back. The CBO has quantified this. The general agreement is that most of the spending, like eventually giving federal employees their back pay once this ends, that's mostly just delayed. It'll eventually flow back into the economy.
Right, but the actual economic output, the work that wasn't done by those furloughed employees, that's just gone.
The crucial distinction, yes. The CBO confirms that lost output is permanent. It's unrecoverable. And depending on how long the shutdown drags on, say, 4 weeks versus 8 weeks, the total cumulative loss of real GDP by the end of 2026, it's estimated to be somewhere between $7 billion and $14 billion. That's in 2025 dollars. That money, that economic activity, it just vanished, gone forever.
Okay, so we're looking at up to $14 billion in permanent, unrecoverable economic loss just floating out there. Plus, significant stress on essential safety workers. But let's pivot to what might be the truly catastrophic consequence for the most vulnerable Americans. This SNAP crisis. An $8 billion program, 40 million people, set to halt November 1st.
It's a devastating situation, and it really is historically unprecedented. For over 60 years, more than 6 decades, this benefit has never been interrupted like this. We're talking about a huge number of people. 40 million across the country rely on this. Just look at Texas, for example. That's 3.5 million low-income Texans who count on these benefits every month.
And the administration, led by a Trump appointee at the USDA, they've been pretty clear pointing the finger. They're blaming the, quote, Democrat shutdown for this holdup. They're saying there just aren't enough immediate funds available, and they argue they can't legally touch that $5 billion emergency contingency fund.
And that's really the core of the immediate crisis, legally speaking. They have this $5 billion fund set aside specifically for emergencies. But the administration insists they don't have the explicit legal okay to use it for regular benefits during a funding lapse like this, which, it raises a really important question about the political calculations here. Why aren't lawmakers scrambling to find a quick fix for this specific issue?
Well, we did see some movement, or at least some talk. Some prominent Republicans, names like Senator Josh Hawley, Representative Monica de la Cruz, they publicly supported the idea of a standalone bill, something just to fund SNAP immediately, separate from the big shutdown fight.
That's true, but Senate Republican leadership hasn't brought it up for a vote.
Yeah.
So nothing's happened. And the result is the benefits are going to be delayed. The impact will be instantaneous and severe. Families are going to be faced with just catastrophic choices, forced to, quote, skip or cut back on meals, or choose between paying rent and buying food. And think about the food banks. They're already stretched thin trying to help unpaid federal workers. Now they face this impossible wave. It just starkly reveals the severe human cost that this political stalemate is creating.
Okay, so this is where the comparison becomes really unavoidable, isn't it? Where the policy meets the price tag, we've got potentially $14 billion in permanent economic loss from the shutdown itself, and 40 million people about to lose food aid. Now let's turn back to the core demand being made to solve this crisis, that $500 billion permanent expansion of the enhanced ACA subsidies. Critics have definitely not held back, calling it a fiscal boondoggle.
And when you look closely at the numbers, you start to understand why they're using that kind of language. The demand, essentially, is to take a temporary benefit, something put in place during the pandemic, and lock it in as permanent law. The CBO estimates making these enhanced subsidies permanent will increase federal spending by $415 billion. That's just the direct costs over the next decade.
Plus interest, right? There's always interest on the debt.
Exactly. You have to add another $48 billion just increase interest payments because of that extra borrowing. So the total price tag gets close to $463 billion. That is just orders of magnitude greater than the permanent economic loss the shutdown itself is causing.
So what's the justification? What's the policy defense for demanding nearly $500 billion in new permanent spending as the price for just, performing basic government functions? And why this label, welfare for the wealthy?
Well, what's really interesting, or maybe alarming, depending on your view, is how these enhanced subsidies fundamentally change who the program was for. Originally, ACA subsidies phased out for people earning above 400% of the federal poverty line. That was the cutoff, the enhancement. It just completely removed that income cap. Gone. Now, eligibility is only tied to healthcare premiums being more than 8.5% of your household income. Doesn't matter how high that income actually is. And the CBO data gives us a pretty staggering example here. Let's take a hypothetical family in Prescott, Arizona. They could be making $500,000 a year, $500,000, and still qualify for an $8,423 subsidy from taxpayers every year. For that family, eligibility doesn't fully phase out until their income goes over $599,000. So these are taxpayer dollars being directly routed to affluent households. That dramatically shifts the program away from basic assistance towards, well, a much broader middle and upper class entitlement.
Wow, that completely changes the picture of who benefits, doesn't it? If the income cap is just gone, who is this $400 billion plus actually funding?
The enrollment data tells the story. Since these enhanced subsidies kicked in back in 2021, the number of people signing up on the ACA marketplace with incomes above that old 400% FPL mark, it has quadrupled. And the CBO estimates that if these subsidies are made permanent, fully half, 50% of the almost 7 million new people expected to enroll, they would earn above that 400% FPL threshold. And here's the absolute kicker, the most crucial piece of data when you talk about the cost. This expansion of the caseload into more affluent households. That accounts for a massive 89% of the direct additional costs, 89% of that $415 billion demand. So fundamentally, this policy push is about a huge permanent expansion of subsidies flowing into high-income households.
Yeah, that certainly adds weight to that old warning you hear from opponents, doesn't it? Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program.
Precisely. These were explicitly temporary Obamacare COVID credits. They were pushed through on a party line vote without a single Republican supporting them back in 2021. So the concern now is that making them permanent solidifies this absolutely colossal entitlement expansion, one that largely benefits wealthier households. And it's happening under the extreme duress of a government shutdown that is right now about to cut off food aid for 40 million vulnerable people. It's quite a contrast.
Okay, so let's just try to summarize the core tension here for you, the listener. Right now, the government shutdown is causing potentially up to $14 billion in economic output that we'll never get back. Essential safety workers are unpaid, under stress, and critical food aid is about to be cut off for 40 million people. Meanwhile, the key negotiation point, the price to end this immediate crisis, centers on demanding a nearly $500 billion permanent expansion of benefits heavily skewed towards high-income households.
And we probably should acknowledge the political mechanism that's allowing this crisis to just drag on. The reason a simple clean spending bill just funding the government can't easily pass the Senate is partly because of the 60-vote rule, the filibuster. That rule lets a minority, in this case the Democrats, effectively block or indefinitely postpone a vote on legislation to end the shutdown, which means the minority can then leverage their position to demand these huge, costly, permanent policy changes as the price for letting the government reopen. It significantly magnifies the cost of political maneuvering.
So we know the shutdown itself creates a permanent economic loss, somewhere between $7 billion and $14 billion. That's bad enough. But if the price demanded for the solution is this $500 billion expansion of subsidies that disproportionately benefit the wealthy, well, you have to ask yourself, does the cure end up costing far, far more than the disease? Is demanding a massive new permanent entitlement program a justifiable trade-off for just restoring basic government function? That's something for you to decide.